May 14, 1942, Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The scars of December 7th still roar across naval installations. Lieutenant Commander Joseph Rochefort hunched over intercepted Japanese radio transmissions in a windowless underground facility nicknamed the Dungeon. The subterranean room hummed with the sound of ventilation systems struggling against the Hawaiian heat. Outside, waves crashed against the harbor walls where just 5 months earlier, American battleships had burned and sunk in the shallow waters. But the true battle, the invisible war of signals, codes, and ciphers, was now being fought in rooms like this, far from public view. Rochefort's desk was a chaos of paper strips, code books, and half-empty coffee cups. The walls surrounding him were covered in maps and charts, the air thick with cigarette smoke and tension. His bloodshot eyes had the 1,000-yard stare of a man who had gone 72 hours without sleep. The fine lines around those eyes had deepened in the months since Pearl Harbor, and the premature gray at his temples had spread like winter frost. His rumpled khaki uniform carried the scent of the cot in the corner, where he occasionally collapsed for brief naps. He'd taken to working in a maroon smoking jacket and blue carpet slippers, a peculiar sight that his superiors tolerated only because of the extraordinary results his team continued to deliver. "Anything new from the overnight intercepts, Thomas?" Rochefort asked as Lieutenant Thomas Dyer, the unit's cryptanalyst prodigy, entered with a fresh stack of message forms. Dyer, 29 years old with wire-rimmed glasses that made him look even younger, shook his head. "Same traffic patterns as yesterday, Commander. Heavy fleet communications, but the target designation remains obscured." The two men represented different approaches to cryptanalysis. Rochefort was intuitive, a linguist who understood Japanese culture and psychology as well as their language. Dyer was mathematical, a prodigy who could recognize numerical patterns in what looked like chaos to others. Together they formed the intellectual core of Station Hypo, the Pacific Fleet's code-breaking operation. Around them, 23 other cryptanalysts, linguists, and support personnel worked in focused silence. Some bent over IBM tabulating machines, others meticulously catalogued message patterns in handwritten ledgers. The room functioned like a single organism dedicated to one purpose, penetrating the veil of secrecy that obscured Japanese intentions. As dawn broke over the Pacific, Rochefort studied a particular intercept with unusual intensity. While others saw random code groups, the 5-character combinations of the Japanese naval code, Rochefort recognized something deeper, a pattern beneath the pattern that made his pulse quicken. He ran his finger along the columns of characters, pausing occasionally to consult a dog-eared reference book filled with his own handwritten notations. The Japanese were planning something massive, perhaps their largest naval operation since Pearl Harbor itself, but the location remained frustratingly obscured behind the designation AF. "They're repeating this designator across multiple fleet communications," Rochefort said, tapping the paper. "It's consistent with preparations for a major offensive." Dyer leaned over his shoulder. "The timing indicators suggest early June, but we still can't pinpoint AF." The term had appeared with increasing frequency over the past 3 weeks. Initially dismissed as a minor reference, it now dominated the most sensitive Japanese naval communications. From their previous code-breaking work, they knew the Japanese designated Pearl Harbor as AH in their naval code. Location AF had to be somewhere of comparable strategic importance, a target worthy of committing the combined fleet's precious carrier force. The stakes couldn't have been higher. America's position in the Pacific remained precarious. The devastating losses at Pearl Harbor had been followed by the fall of Guam, Wake Island, and the Philippines. The seemingly unstoppable Japanese advance had been checked only briefly at the Battle of the Coral Sea in early May, a tactical draw that had nevertheless cost America the carrier Lexington. With the Doolittle raid on Tokyo in April having wounded Japanese pride, intelligence analysts expected a major countermove. If the Americans could anticipate where the blow would fall, they might finally turn the tide. Rochefort circled the designation with a red pencil. Deciphering what AF represented had become the most critical intelligence question of the war. For weeks, the cryptanalysts of Station Hypo had debated what AF might represent. The Japanese had organized their naval code around geographical designations, 2-letter codes that represented potential targets or operational areas throughout the Pacific theater. Was AF Dutch Harbor in the Aleutians, Johnston Atoll, San Francisco. Each theory had its proponents within the intelligence community, each backed by plausible analysis. Lieutenant Commander Thomas Murphy, a gruff naval intelligence officer attached to CINSPAC headquarters, argued vehemently that AF designated the Aleutian Islands. The Japanese need to secure their northern flank, he insisted during the morning intelligence briefing. Alaska threatens their home islands. They'll move there next. Commander Roland Freeman, who oversaw naval intelligence for the Western Sea frontier, believed AF referred to San Francisco or another West Coast target. They're preparing for strikes against our mainland ports, he argued. It's consistent with their psychological warfare objectives. But Rochefort had developed a theory that made senior officers uncomfortable. AF was Midway, the tiny but strategic American outpost, sitting like a cork in the bottle of Hawaii's defense. Despite spanning barely 2 square miles of coral and sand, Midway's airfield and naval facilities represented America's westernmost defensive position. If Midway fell, the Japanese would have a staging ground just 1,100 miles from Pearl Harbor itself. The Japanese understand Midway's strategic value, Rochefort explained to his team during their daily assessment meeting. It's the logical next target if they want to threaten Hawaii or lure our carriers into a decisive battle. Not everyone was convinced. Commander Arthur McCollum, head of the Far East section of Naval Intelligence in Washington, sent a pointed message questioning Rochefort's analysis. Your identification of AF as Midway contradicts other intelligence indicators suggesting Aleutian operations. Request reassessment. The debate wasn't merely academic. If American forces deployed to defend the wrong location, the actual target would fall unopposed, potentially opening the way for further Japanese advances. With America's limited naval resources in the Pacific, there was no margin for error. Each morning, Rochefort's team gathered around a large map table to reassess their analysis. They tracked ship movements, supply arrangements, and the subtle patterns of Japanese communications that might reveal the enemy's intentions. The evidence remained frustratingly inconclusive. The problem, Rochefort explained to his exhausted team, is that we're missing a direct confirmation. We need something that definitively links AF to a specific geographical location. Ensign Richard Mason, a 23-year-old linguist who had studied in Tokyo before the war, suggested they examine pre-war Japanese naval documents for clues to their geographical designation system. I've been through those files 3 times, responded Lieutenant Ranny Dyer, the unit's document specialist. There's nothing that explicitly connects their code designations to specific locations. The atmosphere in the room grew increasingly tense as May progressed. Intelligence reports indicated the Japanese fleet was already beginning to assemble for the operation. Time was running out to solve the mystery of AF. In a war room 3 floors above Rochefort's basement, Admiral Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, listened as intelligence officers presented competing theories. The room was spare and functional, a large table surrounded by straight-backed chairs, walls covered with operational maps of the Pacific Theater. Through the windows, Pearl Harbor was visible, the wreckage of the USS Arizona still visible beneath the surface, a constant reminder of the cost of intelligence failure. Nimitz, 66 years old with silver hair and piercing blue eyes, had assumed command of the shattered Pacific Fleet in the aftermath of the Pearl Harbor disaster. His calm demeanor masked the enormous pressure he faced. America was still struggling to recover from the opening Japanese onslaught. The nation was mobilizing for war, but new ships, planes, and trained personnel wouldn't reach the Pacific in significant numbers for months. Until then, Nimitz had to fight with what remained, a precarious position that demanded perfect allocation of his limited resources. Captain Wilfred Holmes, a heavy-set intelligence officer with 2 decades of naval service, argued forcefully that intercepted fuel supply requirements indicated the Aleutian Islands as the target. The logistical pattern matches previous Japanese northern operations, he insisted, pointing to shipping deployments tracked on a chart. They're establishing fuel caches along a route to Alaska. Commander Maxwell Templeton from Naval Intelligence suggested California coastal cities as potential targets. We have indications of Japanese submarine reconnaissance off San Francisco and San Diego, he reported. This could be preliminary to carrier strikes against our West Coast facilities. Commander Edwin Layton, Nimitz's intelligence officer, and Rochefort's longtime friend, remained silent until directly questioned. Leighton had known Rochefort since they studied Japanese together in Tokyo during the 1920s. Their shared background in language and culture gave them insights that more traditional naval officers often lacked. "What's your assessment, Edwin?" Nimitz asked, turning to the reserved intelligence officer. "Rochefort believes it's Midway, sir," Leighton said finally, his voice steady but betraying the weight of the judgment. Nimitz leaned forward slightly. "And his evidence?" he asked, his weathered face betraying no emotion. "Pattern recognition in coded traffic, sir, but—" Leighton hesitated. "Nothing conclusive." Admiral Raymond Spruance, newly appointed commander of Cruiser Division 5, who had been invited to the briefing, spoke up. "Midway makes strategic sense. It would extend their defensive perimeter and threaten our lines of communication with Australia. It would also provide them an opportunity to finish what they started in December," added Captain Miles Browning, Nimitz's chief of staff. "Draw out our remaining carriers and eliminate them." "Speculation," countered Captain Holmes. "We need evidence, not theories." The room fell silent as Nimitz rose from his chair and walked to the large map dominating the wall. His finger traced the vast distances of the Pacific, the thousands of miles of empty ocean, where fleets could maneuver undetected until the moment of attack. America's carriers, just 3 operational in the entire Pacific, represented the nation's remaining naval power following Pearl Harbor. Committing them to defend Midway on Rochefort's hunch could mean their destruction if he was wrong. The silence stretched until Nimitz turned back to Leighton. "Tell Rochefort I need certainty, not intuition. If Midway is the target, I need proof I can take to Washington." As Leighton left the conference room, Commander Templeton fell into step beside him. "Rochefort's going out on a limb with this Midway theory," he said quietly. "If he's wrong, his career won't survive it." Leighton nodded grimly. "And if he's right but can't prove it, Midway won't survive." That evening, as tropical rain pelted the corrugated roof of the code-breaking facility, Rochefort paced before a blackboard covered in statistical analyses of Japanese naval communication patterns. The rhythmic sound of the rainfall matched his footsteps as he moved back and forth, occasionally pausing to add a notation or revise a calculation. The room was thick with humidity, the primitive air conditioning systems struggling against Hawaii's climate. The windows had been painted over for security, leaving the fluorescent lights to cast a harsh glow over the scene. Around him, 23 cryptanalysts and linguists worked in focused silence, the room's humidity fogging their eyeglasses and dampening their notepapers. Some hunched over captured Japanese codebooks, others analyzed frequency distributions of intercepted message groups. The war of code-breaking was a peculiar one, fought not with guns and ships but with mathematics, linguistics, and intuition. Lieutenant Commander Alwyn Kramer, who had joined the unit from Washington 2 weeks earlier, stared skeptically at Rochefort's calculations. "The Japanese have altered their JN-25 code 3 times since Pearl Harbor," he noted. "Our penetration is still incomplete." "We don't need complete penetration," Rochefort countered. "We have enough to recognize their operational patterns." Jasper Holmes, a naval reservist and former journalist with the Honolulu Advertiser, watched Rochefort's growing frustration. Holmes had joined the unit because of his knowledge of Hawaiian geography and shipping patterns, but had demonstrated an unexpected aptitude for lateral thinking that made him valuable in analytical discussions. "We know it's Midway," Rochefort muttered, rubbing his bloodshot eyes. "We just can't prove it." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Without proof, Nimitz wouldn't commit his precious carriers to Midway's defense. Without the carriers, Midway would fall, and with Midway in Japanese hands, Hawaii itself would be threatened. Holmes set down his pencil and straightened in his chair. "What if," he said slowly, the idea taking shape as he spoke, "instead of trying to break their code more deeply, we create a situation that forces them to reveal what AF means?" Rochefort stopped pacing. "Go on. The Japanese monitor our communications, right? They've broken some of our operational codes." Holmes warmed to his idea. "What if Midway sent an uncoded message about a water distillation breakdown? If the Japanese are monitoring Midway communications—" The room grew still as the implication became clear. Rochefort's exhaustion seemed to evaporate as he grasped the elegant simplicity of Holmes's suggestion. "They'll report that AF is having water problems, and we'll have our proof," Holmes finished. Lieutenant Thomas Dyer, who had been silently following the exchange, nodded enthusiastically. It's perfect. We create the intelligence they intercept, then watch how they report it internally. A planted message, added Ensign Davenport. If they refer to water problems at AF after we send the Midway message, then AF is definitively Midway, Rochefort concluded. The beauty of it is its simplicity. By midnight, the plan had taken shape with elegant simplicity. They would have Midway send an uncoded radio message reporting a critical failure in their freshwater distillation system. Then they would watch the Japanese coded transmissions for any mention of water problems at AF. If the Japanese took the bait, they would have their confirmation that AF was indeed Midway. Lieutenant Rice Sanger, the team's communications specialist, drafted the message for Midway. From Midway to Sinkspack, emergency, distillation system breakdown, requiring immediate water resupply. Estimate current supply sufficient for 2 weeks maximum. Rochefort reviewed the text, making small revisions. It needs to sound urgent, but not panic-inducing, he explained. Serious enough to report up their intelligence chain, but not so dire that it suggests we're evacuating. The team worked through the technical details until dawn, which channels to use, optimal transmission times to ensure Japanese monitoring stations would intercept it, and how to ensure the message appeared routine while still being noteworthy enough for Japanese intelligence to forward it up their reporting chain. As the plan took final shape, Rochefort recognized its brilliance lay in its reversal of traditional intelligence roles. Instead of passively collecting and analyzing enemy communications, they would actively create the intelligence they needed the enemy to transmit. It was code-breaking turned inside out, a deception operation that would use the Japanese communication system against itself. The next morning, Rochefort faced skepticism from Captain John Redman, the Director of Naval Communications in Washington, during their secure teleconference. The connection between Hawaii and Washington was temperamental, with static frequently interrupting their exchange. The 9-hour time difference meant it was evening in Washington, with Redman clearly having been pulled from a social engagement to take the call. You want to compromise operational security with a fake water shortage message? Redman's voice crackled over the secure line, his tone suggesting he questioned not just the plan, but Rochefort's judgment. This isn't standard procedure, Commander. Rochefort had anticipated the resistance. Redman represented the traditional Navy hierarchy, Annapolis-educated, with a conventional approach to intelligence operations. The tension between Washington's communications establishment and Rochefort's more unorthodox Pacific operation had been growing for months. It's a controlled risk, sir, Rochefort replied, choosing his words carefully. The message will appear routine, exactly the kind of administrative communication the Japanese would expect. And if they detect the deception? There's nothing to detect, sir. Midway does have water distillation systems. They occasionally do have maintenance issues. There's nothing in the message that would indicate deception. And if the Japanese ignore it completely, then we're no worse off than we are now, Rochefort countered, sensing Redman's resistance weakening slightly. But if they report it, we'll know beyond any doubt that AF is Midway. Silence filled the line before Redman responded. I'll take it to Admiral King. The reference to Fleet Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations and Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Fleet indicated Redman recognized the strategic importance of the proposal, despite his reservations. That's all I ask, sir, Rochefort said, maintaining his professional tone despite the frustration he felt. The plan was sound, but bureaucratic obstacles threatened to delay it until it was too late. After Rochefort hung up the secure phone, Commander Layton entered the dungeon. How did Washington take it? About as expected, Rochefort replied, lighting a cigarette. Redman thinks it's unorthodox. It is unorthodox, Layton said with a slight smile. That's why it might work. 2 days passed before approval came, 48 crucial hours during which the Japanese continued their preparations for the Midway operation. Every intelligence indicator suggested the enemy fleet would begin moving within the week. The window for confirming the target was rapidly closing. Finally, the authorization arrived in a terse message from Admiral King himself. Approve communications deception. Plan stop strict operational security required. Stop immediate reporting of results required. On May 20th, Captain Cyril Simard, the commander at Midway, sent a plain-language radio message reporting urgent water purification problems on the island. The transmission went out in the clear, using a frequency known to be monitored by Japanese radio operators. From Midway to Pearl Harbor, urgent. Distillation equipment experiencing serious malfunction. Water supply critically reduced. Request immediate transport of water purification. Chemicals and replacement parts. Confirm receipt and estimated delivery date. The message traveled across open airwaves, easily intercepted by Japanese radio operators who routinely monitored American military communications. For authenticity, Pearl Harbor replied with an equally uncoded acknowledgement promising water shipment within the week. In the dungeon, Rochefort's team worked in rotating shifts, analyzing every Japanese naval transmission. The atmosphere was tense with anticipation. If the plan worked, they would have their confirmation within days. If it failed, the opportunity to anticipate the Japanese attack might be lost. 36 hours later, their vigilance paid off. The Japanese naval communication station at Hashirajima transmitted a message to the Combined Fleet headquarters. When decrypted, the message contained exactly what Rochefort had predicted, a routine intelligence report stating that AF was experiencing water shortages. The trap had worked perfectly. The message had traveled through the Japanese intelligence system exactly as Holmes and Rochefort had anticipated. Japanese radio operators monitoring American Pacific communications had intercepted the Midway transmission. The information had been forwarded to the intelligence section of the Naval General Staff, who had included it in their regular operational brief to fleet commanders preparing for the upcoming Midway operation. In doing so, they had inadvertently confirmed what the Americans most needed to know, that AF was indeed Midway. Ensign Willis Davenport, a 25-year-old language specialist with 3 years of study at Kyoto Imperial University before the war, rushed the translated intercept to Rochefort, who was asleep on his cot. The young officer's hands trembled slightly with the significance of what he carried. "Sir," Davenport said, gently shaking Rochefort's shoulder, "we've got it." Rochefort sat up, instantly awake despite having slept only 2 hours after a 16-hour shift. He read the translation twice, then reached for the secure phone to Nimitz's headquarters. The time was 3:27 in the morning. "We have confirmation, sir," he said when Nimitz came on the line. "AF is Midway." There was a moment of silence on the line. "You're certain?" Nimitz asked, his voice calm but intent. "The Japanese have reported that AF is having water problems, sir." "Exactly as we baited them to do. There's no ambiguity. AF is definitively Midway." "Well done, Joe," Nimitz said, using Rochefort's first name in a rare display of informal approval. "I'll be down within the hour." Within hours, Admiral Nimitz stood in the dungeon examining the evidence himself. The Japanese had revealed their target through a single careless relay of information. Now the Americans had something unprecedented in the Pacific War, advanced knowledge of the enemy's major offensive operation. "How certain are you of their timing?" Nimitz asked. Rochefort pointed to a series of decoded fragments. These weather routing instructions and supply ship deployments put their attack force arriving at Midway early morning on June 4th. "That gives us 2 weeks, Nimitz said, studying the calendar on the wall. What followed was the most intensive fortnight of planning in Pacific Fleet history. While Rochefort's team continued decrypting Japanese communications to reveal additional details of the coming attack, Nimitz made the most fateful decision of his command. He would commit all 3 available American aircraft carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown, to the defense of Midway. The Yorktown had limped back to Pearl Harbor, badly damaged from the Battle of the Coral Sea. Repair estimates indicated 3 months of yard work would be necessary. Nimitz walked through the shattered decks of the carrier and told the yard commander, "You have 72 hours." In an extraordinary feat of round-the-clock labor, Yorktown was made combat-ready in just 3 days, with civilian yard workers still aboard when she sailed for Midway. On the other side of the Pacific, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, commander of the Japanese Combined Fleet, finalized his complex plan to capture Midway and force a decisive battle with the remaining American carriers. His operation involved 5 separate force groups, including 4 aircraft carriers, 11 battleships and 169 other warships, the mightiest naval armada yet assembled in the Pacific War. From radio intercepts, Rochefort's team pieced together the Japanese order of battle with remarkable accuracy, identifying the carriers Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu as the main striking force under Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, the same commander who had led the Pearl Harbor attack. Yamamoto's plan depended on surprise and deception. A feint toward the Aleutian Islands would divide American attention, while the main force approached Midway from the northwest, undetected until their aircraft were already in the air. What Yamamoto couldn't know was that the element of surprise had already been neutralized by Rochefort's intelligence coup. In the pre-dawn darkness of June 4, 1942, American radar operators on Midway detected the first wave of Japanese aircraft 150 miles out. As air raid sirens wailed across the tiny atoll, Marine Corps fighters scrambled to intercept, while bombers prepared to strike the Japanese carriers once they were located. Far out at sea, the American carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown, had achieved the remarkable. They had positioned themselves northeast of Midway, ideally situated to strike Nagumo's carriers from an unexpected direction. Admiral Nagumo received reports of the Midway installations and ordered his aircraft rearmed for a second strike on the island. Then came the news that American ships had been spotted. Caught in the midst of rearming operations, Nagumo's carriers were at their most vulnerable. Flight decks crowded with bombs and fueled aircraft, when American dive bombers appeared overhead. Within 6 minutes, 3 Japanese carriers were transformed into floating infernos. The Akagi, Nagumo's flagship, took a direct hit that penetrated to the hangar deck where armed and fueled aircraft waited. The resulting explosion broke the back of the great carrier. Kaga was struck by 4 bombs that ignited catastrophic fires fueled by aviation gasoline. Soryu suffered 3 bomb hits that doomed her within 30 minutes. Only Hiryu escaped the initial attack, launching a counterattack that severely damaged Yorktown. But by late afternoon, Hiryu too had been located and bombed into a blazing wreck. As night fell across the Pacific battlefield, Yamamoto faced the unthinkable: 4 irreplaceable fleet carriers lost, along with their irreplaceable veteran air crews. He reluctantly ordered a general withdrawal, abandoning the Midway operation. The decisive American victory at Midway represented a stunning reversal of fortune just 6 months after Pearl Harbor. While many factors contributed to the outcome, the battle might never have been won without Rochefort's code-breaking operation and the brilliant deception that confirmed Midway as the Japanese target. In the aftermath, Admiral Nimitz personally visited Station Haipo to thank Rochefort and his team. "The intelligence you provided was worth at least another carrier in this battle," Nimitz told them. Yet in Washington, the politics of intelligence rivalries soon overshadowed Rochefort's achievement. Captain Joseph Redman, whose brother John had initially opposed Rochefort's water distillation deception, moved to consolidate cryptanalytic operations under Washington's control. Despite his pivotal role in the most significant American naval victory of the war, Rochefort was reassigned in October 1942 to command a floating dry dock in San Francisco, about as far from intelligence work as the Navy could place him. Rochefort accepted the assignment without public complaint, maintaining his silence about the classified work that had helped turn the tide of the Pacific War. 70 miles north of Tokyo, Imperial Japanese Naval Headquarters grappled with the catastrophic loss at Midway. Admiral Mitsumasa Yonai, the former Prime Minister who had opposed war with America, summed up the battle's significance. "I knew we were defeated after Midway." In post-war analysis, Japanese naval officers remained bewildered by the Americans' seemingly prescient positioning of forces. Not until decades later did they learn the truth, that a simple ruse involving a water shortage report had exposed their most closely guarded operational secret. The defeat at Midway permanently ended Japanese offensive capabilities in the Pacific. Never again would they launch a major fleet operation comparable to Pearl Harbor or Midway. The strategic initiative passed irrevocably to the Americans, who would maintain it for the remainder of the war. Rochefort's water shortage deception stands as one of military history's most elegant intelligence operations. With minimal resources and maximum ingenuity, his team had reversed the conventional dynamic between codebreakers and codemakers. Instead of merely deciphering enemy communications, they had manipulated those communications to reveal critical intelligence that might otherwise have remained hidden. In 1946, As the details of the Pacific War's intelligence operations began to emerge from classified status, several officers who had worked with Rochefort recommended him for a Distinguished Service Medal. The recommendation was denied. Rochefort returned to intelligence work only briefly before retiring from the Navy in 1953. He took a civilian position with a California bank and rarely spoke about his wartime service, even to family members. The full extent of his contribution remained obscured by classification and institutional politics for decades. Not until 1986, 14 years after Rochefort's death, did the U.S. Navy finally award him the Distinguished Service Medal, recognizing the pivotal role his code-breaking team had played at the Battle of Midway. The citation noted his exceptional meritorious service and outstanding leadership, analytical skill, and tireless devotion to duty. The belated recognition highlighted a persistent truth about intelligence work, that its practitioners often operate in obscurity, their achievements unacknowledged even when they alter the course of history. In the decades following the war, the story of the Midway deception gradually emerged through declassified records and historical research. What had seemed like American tactical brilliance or Japanese operational failure was revealed as the outcome of an intelligence contest that had been decisively won before the first aircraft took flight. Former Ensign Willis Davenport, who had rushed the confirming intelligence to Rochefort that May night in 1942, later reflected, "It wasn't just that we broke their codes. We understood how they thought, how they communicated. That's why the water trick worked, because we knew they would report it exactly as they did." The success of Rochefort's deception rested on more than technical code-breaking skill. It demonstrated the crucial importance of cultural understanding in intelligence operations. Rochefort had studied in Japan before the war, learning the language and absorbing cultural insights that later informed his analytical judgments. He recognized patterns in Japanese communications that less culturally attuned analysts might have missed. The water shortage deception also illustrated a fundamental principle that would shape modern intelligence operations. That passive collection of information can be supplemented by active measures designed to elicit specific enemy reactions. This concept would evolve into sophisticated counterintelligence techniques employed throughout the Cold War and beyond. At the Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island, the Midway case study became required curriculum for generations of officers. Students analyzed not only the tactical decisions made during the battle itself, but the intelligence preparation that made those decisions possible. The water shortage deception received particular attention as an example of asymmetric advantage, how a small, resource-constrained intelligence unit could decisively impact a major fleet engagement. Admiral Raymond Spruance, who commanded Task Force 16 at Midway, later commented that the battle represented the first time in the war that we had the right information in the right place at the right time. That convergence was no accident, but the result of Rochefort's inspired improvisation. In Station Hypo's darkened operations room, a simple map had hung throughout the battle, tracking the positions of Japanese vessels as they converged on Midway. As reports of burning Japanese carriers arrived on that June afternoon, a cryptanalyst named Jasper Holmes, the same officer who had first suggested the water shortage ruse, quietly placed 4 red pins on the map, marking the locations where each enemy carrier had met its end. Rochefort, passing behind him, paused to study the map. The red pins formed an irregular quadrilateral in the empty ocean northeast of Midway, a geometric pattern representing the most consequential intelligence victory in American naval history. "The difference between reading their mail and writing it for them," Rochefort remarked softly. Holmes nodded, understanding the profound truth in the comment. They had transcended the traditional role of code breakers by crafting a message the enemy unwittingly delivered to themselves. The legacy of Rochefort's water shortage deception extends beyond military history into the broader realm of strategic thinking. It demonstrates how lateral approaches to seemingly intractable problems can yield breakthrough results. When direct analysis of Japanese codes couldn't definitively identify AF, Rochefort's team changed the parameters of the problem itself. This principle, that problems resistant to frontal assault might yield to indirect approach, would influence domains far removed from cryptanalysis, from business strategy to scientific research. The elegant simplicity of the Midway deception continues to inspire problem solvers facing their own seemingly insurmountable challenges. In the National Cryptologic Museum outside Fort Meade, Maryland, a modest display commemorates the Midway operation. Alongside arcane cipher machines and technical explanations of code-breaking methodologies, stands a simple water distillation unit salvaged from a World War II-era naval vessel. A reminder that sometimes the most powerful weapons in intelligence work are not sophisticated technologies but creative human minds. The display includes a quote from Admiral Nimitz, delivered at a private ceremony honoring intelligence personnel after the war. "Had we lacked the cryptographic intelligence developed at Station Hypo, the Battle of Midway might have ended as disastrously for us as Pearl Harbor." What remains most remarkable about the water shortage deception is its economy of means. No expensive technology was required, no complex operational plan, no commitment of scarce resources. Just a simple message, crafted to elicit a predictable response, timed and targeted with precision. In this respect, it represents intelligence work in its purest form, the application of human insight to extract maximum advantage from minimal intervention. The Japanese Navy, with its hundreds of ships and thousands of aircraft, had been undone by a single fictional report about a broken water system on a remote Pacific island. The final irony of Rochefort's achievement is that it succeeded so completely that its significance was initially overlooked in post-battle analyses. Military historians focused on the dramatic carrier engagements rather than the intelligence preparation that made American tactical success possible. Only gradually did the full importance of Station Hypo's contribution emerge from the classified shadows. By 1999, when the U.S. Navy named a new building at the National Security Agency the Joseph Rochefort Center, the rehabilitation of his professional reputation was complete. The facility houses advanced cryptologic operations that would have seemed like science fiction to Rochefort and his team of codebreakers working with pencils and paper in their humid underground chamber at Pearl Harbor. Yet for all the technological advances in signals intelligence since 1942, the fundamental insight demonstrated by the water shortage deception remains relevant, that understanding how an adversary processes and communicates information can be as important as decrypting the information itself. In the quiet waters off Midway Atoll today, where coral has grown over the scattered remnants of sunken aircraft, nature has reclaimed the battlefield. The brilliant blue lagoon shows little evidence of the momentous struggle that unfolded there. Occasionally, divers exploring the depths might encounter a corroded piece of aluminum or steel, silent memorials to the hundreds of men who perished when their aircraft plunged into the sea. On the atoll itself, now a wildlife refuge where albatrosses and terns nest by the thousands, concrete bunkers and gun emplacements still remain, slowly crumbling under the relentless Pacific elements. These weathered structures stand as testaments to the strategic importance once attached to this tiny speck of land in the vast ocean. The battle fought here in 1942 reshaped the course of the Pacific War, and with it, the geopolitical future of the entire region. The American victory, enabled by Rochefort's intelligence coup, marked the point at which Japanese expansion reached its zenith before beginning its long, bloody contraction back toward the home islands. But the intellectual legacy of what happened there continues to influence how intelligence professionals approach their craft, a legacy that began with Lieutenant Commander Joseph Rochefort's inspired decision to send a simple false message about a water shortage on a tiny Pacific island, changing the course of the greatest naval war in history. In the aftermath of the Midway operation, Rochefort's deception technique became part of the standard intelligence toolkit. During the Guadalcanal campaign later that same year, similar methods were employed to determine Japanese intentions and timing. By 1944, as the American island-hopping campaign pushed westward, deliberately planted information became a routine aspect of counterintelligence operations. The underlying principle, creating situations that force an adversary to reveal their knowledge or intentions, transcended the Pacific theater. In Europe, Allied deception operations like Operation Fortitude before the D-Day landings employed similar psychological insights about how intelligence organizations process and prioritize information. The academic study of Rochefort's water shortage deception has become a standard case analysis in intelligence training programs worldwide. At the CIA's Farm Training Facility in Virginia, new intelligence officers study the operation as a model of simplicity and effectiveness. At Britain's Defence Intelligence and Security Centre, instructors use it to demonstrate how understanding an adversary's intelligence collection methods creates opportunities for deception. Yet despite its influence and significance, Rochefort's operation remains relatively unknown to the general public. Unlike the more dramatic, code-breaking achievements of Bletchley Park in England, which have been celebrated in popular books and films, the Pacific War's intelligence operations remained classified for decades longer. In 1967, 25 years after the battle, Edwin Layton authored a classified report for the National Security Agency detailing the full extent of Station Hypo's contribution to the Midway victory. The report remained classified until 1985, when heavily redacted versions began appearing in academic research. Only in 2001, nearly 6 decades after the events, did the National Security Agency declassify its comprehensive history of Pacific Theater code-breaking operations, finally allowing the full story of the water shortage deception to be told. By then, most of the participants had passed away. Rochefort died in 1976 at the age of 76, having spent his post-Navy years in relative obscurity as a bank executive in Southern California. Jasper Holmes, whose suggestions sparked the deception operation, became a historian and author, but rarely discussed his wartime intelligence work before his death in 1986. Of all the principals involved in the Midway operation, only Thomas Dyer lived to see the full public recognition of their achievement. In 2005, at age 94, Dyer attended the dedication of a permanent exhibit on the Midway deception at the National Cryptologic Museum. When asked by a reporter what made the operation so effective, Dyer replied simply, "We understood not just what the Japanese said, but how they thought about what they said." This psychological dimension of the water shortage deception underscores its continuing relevance in an age of quantum computing and artificial intelligence. While the technical aspects of code-breaking have been transformed by technology, the human elements of intelligence operations, understanding organizational psychology, anticipating information flows, and recognizing cultural patterns, remain as crucial as they were in Rochefort's day. Modern intelligence professionals studying the Midway operation often note how Rochefort's cultural understanding of Japan, gained through his pre-war language training in Tokyo, proved as valuable as his technical cryptanalytic skills. He understood not just the Japanese language, but the institutional culture of the Imperial Japanese Navy, how it gathered, processed, and distributed intelligence. This cultural expertise allowed him to predict with remarkable accuracy how the planted water shortage information would move through the Japanese intelligence system. Similar cultural expertise remains a prized attribute in intelligence operations today, whether directed against terrorist networks, cyber threats, or traditional state adversaries. The water shortage deception also demonstrates the importance of what intelligence professionals now call red team thinking, the ability to view operations from an adversary's perspective. Rochefort and Holmes succeeded because they could mentally step into the role of Japanese intelligence officers and anticipate how those officers would process and forward the information about Midway's supposed water crisis. Perhaps the most enduring lesson of the Midway deception is that intelligence success often depends less on technological superiority than on creative thinking. Rochefort's team lacked the resources, personnel, and computational tools available to modern intelligence agencies. They worked with pencil and paper, slide rules and typewriters, in a humid underground room with inadequate ventilation and lighting. Yet they conceived and executed an operation of elegant simplicity that decisively influenced a pivotal naval battle. Their achievement reminds us that human ingenuity often trumps material advantage in the shadow world of intelligence operations. The legacy of Rochefort's deception extends beyond the technical realm of cryptology into broader questions about how organizations process information and make decisions. By creating a controlled information input and tracking its movement through an adversary's system, Rochefort and his team revealed not just the meaning of AF, but the structure and function of Japanese naval intelligence itself. This principle, that how an organization handles information reveals its internal structures and priorities, has applications far beyond military intelligence. From corporate competitive intelligence to cybersecurity, understanding how adversaries collect and process information creates opportunities to shape their perceptions and decisions. As dawn breaks over Midway Atoll on a typical day, with thousands of seabirds wheeling above the lagoon, few visitors connect this tranquil scene with the intelligence duel that preceded the historic battle. Yet this peaceful vista exists in part because of an inspired act of deception conceived in a basement room at Pearl Harbor, a reminder that the most consequential intelligence operations often leave no visible trace on the historical landscape they help to create. In the end, what makes Rochefort's achievement remarkable is not just its historical significance but its timeless demonstration of intelligence work at its most essential, the application of human insight to solve seemingly intractable problems with elegance, precision, and decisive effect. The water shortage deception stands as a masterpiece of intelligence craft, a perfect fusion of technical knowledge, cultural understanding, and creative thinking that changed the course of history with a single, carefully crafted message.